886 times. That is how much Jeremy Clarkson's pub lost. Not after empty tables, not after a failed launch, not after a quiet winter. It lost that money while the pub was fully booked, every day. And that is the part nobody expected, because a packed pub is supposed to mean one thing: profit. But the farmer's dog, Clarkson's Cotswolds pub, delivered the opposite. Full tables, long queues, constant attention, and still, a reported pre-tax loss of 84.86 cents in its first 4 months. So what went wrong? Nothing. That is the twist. The farmer's dog was not losing because nobody wanted it. It was losing because too many people did. And that one contradiction explains far more about British hospitality than most people realize. Jeremy Clarkson did not open this pub quietly. He opened it as an extension of a world millions already knew. The farm, the shop, the beer, the television show, the messy, expensive, occasionally ridiculous reality of trying to make British farming work. The farmer's dog was meant to be more than a pub. It was meant to be proof. Proof that British food could be served properly. Proof that local farmers could be supported. Proof that people would travel for something honest, imperfect, and rooted in the countryside. But honesty is expensive. And by the end of this story, that 84-86 as loss will not look like a failure. It will look like a warning. Because if Jeremy Clarkson cannot turn a packed pub into easy profit, what chance does the ordinary British landlord have? Here is the thing. Most pub owners lose money because the customers stop coming. The tables sit empty. The kitchen closes early. The staff polish glasses that do not need polishing. And eventually, someone puts a handwritten notice in the window. Closed. Not because the food was bad. Not because the people did not care. But because the numbers finally won. That is not what happened at the Farmer's Dog. Clarkson said the pub was fully booked every day. Think about that. Every restaurant owner in Britain knows what fully booked is supposed to mean. It means you made it. It means the menu works. The staff are busy. The customers are happy. The tills are ringing. But being busy is not the same as making money. And that is where the story changes. The Farmer's Dog sits near Burford in Oxfordshire, surrounded by the sort of countryside people picture when they imagine Old England. Stone villages, narrow lanes, fields that look calm from a distance. But farming is not calm. Not anymore. It is paperwork, prices, weather, labor shortages, supermarket pressure, rising costs, and a system that somehow expects farmers to feed the country for less money every year. Clarkson built his pub in the middle of that world. Then he made one decision that changed everything. British only. Not British when convenient. British when it hurts. The pub's own promise is simple. British food and British drinks, including Hawkstone. That sounds admirable. It also sounds expensive, because the cheapest product is rarely the British one. Imported food is often easier to buy, easier to transport, easier to source in bulk, and much easier to turn into profit. Clarkson has said that this approach can mean losing around £10 every time a customer eats at the pub. Read that again. A customer walks in, orders food, the kitchen gets busy, the room feels alive, and the business may lose money serving them. That is not normal restaurant logic. But the Farmer's Dog was never built on normal restaurant logic. It was built on a belief that British farmers deserve a route to market, that British ingredients deserve a place on the menu, and that people are tired of eating food that comes from nowhere, belongs to nobody, and somehow costs less than the people who grew it can survive on. That belief fills seats, but it does not pay bills by itself. And this is where it gets strange. The more successful the pub became, the more expensive it became to run. More customers meant more staff, more cleaning, more food preparation, more waste, more pressure on water systems, more pressure on parking, more pressure on electricity, more pressure on every small part of the building nobody thinks about until it stops working. Reportedly, the pub faced problems involving parking, water supply, and waste systems as demand increased. A permanent electricity upgrade was reported to cost around £2,000. That is not a pub problem. That is an infrastructure problem. And infrastructure does not care how many people love your food. It only cares how many people are flushing toilets, running taps, charging machines, opening refrigerators, filling kitchens, and arriving in cars. A packed pub looks like success. Behind the scenes, it can feel like a small factory under attack. That is the irony. The farmer's dog did what it was designed to do. It attracted people. Then it had to survive the consequences. And that is why the 84-86 pints loss matters. Not because Clarkson cannot afford it. He can. Not because the pub is unpopular. It clearly is not. The figure matters because it exposes something thousands of independent pub owners already understand. Demand and profit are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. A full dining room can still lose money if the ingredients cost too much, if the staff bill is too high, if energy rises again, if waste costs increase, if the kitchen is working flat out but the margins are too thin, if customers love the experience but do not spend enough to cover what that experience truly costs. And that is where small pub owners get trapped. They cannot simply lower standards because customers notice. They cannot simply cut staff because service collapses. They cannot simply raise prices because customers complain. They cannot simply buy cheaper food because then they become exactly like every other pub selling the same thing. There is no painless answer. Pay the farmer fairly. Pay the staff fairly. Keep the food cheap. Pick two. That is the impossible triangle, and Clarkson has chosen the hardest version of it. He wants to support British producers. He wants to serve British food. He wants to create jobs. He wants people to feel they are part of something real. But every one of those decisions costs money. The pub is not selling the cheapest version of lunch. It is selling an idea, a British field, a British pint, a meal that did not arrive through a system designed only to make numbers look good on a supermarket shelf. People travel because of that. They come because they watch the farm. They come because they know the names. They come because the place feels connected to a larger story. And that connection is powerful. You cannot manufacture it in a boardroom. You cannot buy it with an advertising campaign. You have to earn it. But it still creates a brutal question. Can emotional loyalty carry a business when the economics are fighting back? That is what the farmer's dog is really testing. Not whether Clarkson can run a pub, not whether people will visit, not whether British food tastes good. They have already answered those questions. The real test is whether a business can put British sourcing first, remain busy, pay its costs, and still make enough money to survive once the novelty fades. Because novelty is easy, consistency is expensive. And the pub cannot depend forever on people visiting because they saw it on television. At some point, the business has to stand on its own feet. The food has to justify the price. The service has to remain good. The systems have to hold. And the margin has to survive. Now, this is where Hawkstone becomes important. The farmer's dog promotes Hawkstone beer alongside its British food. It connects the pub to Clarkson's wider business world. Diddley Squat Farm, the farm shop, the television show, and the drinks brand. That means the pub may do more than sell meals. It creates attention. It turns viewers into visitors, visitors into customers, customers into people who talk about the farm, the beer, the food, and the whole Clarkson world after they leave. Someone may come for a roast, then order a pint, then take photographs, then tell friends, then return months later, then buy something else connected to the brand. That does not make a loss meaningless, but it does mean a pub can have value beyond the day's takings. The accountant sees $8,486. The customer sees a good day out. The farmer sees another possible buyer. The brand sees loyalty. And the independent publican watching from across Britain sees something else entirely. A problem. Because they do not have Clarkson's safety net. They do not have television cameras. They do not have millions of viewers. They do not have a farm shop, a beer brand, and a national personality driving customers to their door. They have the same food costs, the same wage pressure, the same energy bills, the same supplier invoices, the same customers demanding quality at a price they can afford. And if business goes wrong, there is no second act. There is just a closed pub. That is why this story is bigger than Jeremy Clarkson. It is about what British hospitality has become. For years, we have been trained to expect food to be cheap. Cheap chicken, cheap milk, cheap bread, cheap meals, cheap everything. But cheap food always has a cost. The question is only where that cost goes. Sometimes it goes to the farmer. Sometimes it goes to the worker. Sometimes it goes to the land. Sometimes it goes to the small business that cannot compete with a giant chain. And sometimes it shows up in a set of accounts from a packed pub in Oxfordshire. The supermarkets did not set out to destroy rural businesses. They followed the logic customers rewarded: lower prices, more choice, faster convenience. But that logic has consequences. Britain wanted cheaper food, then wondered why farmers could not make a living. Britain wanted pubs to stay affordable, then wondered why village locals disappeared. Britain wanted quality without paying for it, and eventually, the numbers stopped pretending. The farmer's dog has made those numbers impossible to ignore. Here is the most important point. The 84-86 loss does not prove the pub has failed. 4 months is not long enough to judge a complex operation still learning its staffing, supply chain, demand, and infrastructure. But it does not prove success either. A crowd is not a business model. A queue is not a margin. A full booking calendar is not a guarantee. The pub still has to solve the same problem every rural business faces. How do you offer something better without pricing people out? How do you support local producers without losing money on every plate? How do you keep a place human when the costs are becoming industrial? That is the battle. And it is bigger than one famous pub. The farmer's dog was not losing because people stayed away. It was losing because the real cost of doing things properly arrived before the profit did. That is not failure. That is the price of the experiment. So what do you think? Should pubs charge more for genuinely British food, even if fewer people can afford it? Or should they keep prices lower, even if more value leaves the farm?